John Miller had always been a man of few words, the kind of person who preferred actions over explanations. When he moved into Maple Ridge Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its cookie-cutter houses and meticulously maintained lawns, he hoped to blend in seamlessly. He wasn't looking for attention or praise. All he wanted was a peaceful place to settle down after years of serving his country. But blending in wasn't as easy as he thought it would be. Maple Ridge Estates had rules, lots of them. The Homeowners Association, HOA, enforced everything from mailbox colors to the height of hedges. It was the kind of community where perfection mattered more than personality. And while John didn't mind following the rules, he couldn't help but feel out of place among the sea of overly enthusiastic neighbors who seemed obsessed with appearances. His modest home stood out, not because it was messy or unkempt, but because it lacked the sterile precision that defined the rest of the street. Despite this, John tried to fit in. On weekends, he could often be found tending to his garden, trimming bushes, or painting weathered spots on his fence. He greeted passersby with a polite nod and exchanged small talk when necessary. Most neighbors appreciated his quiet demeanor, though they rarely went out of their way to get to know him. That is, except for Karen Hargrove. Karen was the unofficial queen of Maple Ridge Estates, or at least she acted like it. As the head of the HOA committee, she took immense pride in ensuring everyone adhered to the strict guidelines set by the association. Her own property was the epitome of suburban perfection. A flawlessly green lawn, symmetrical flower beds, and a shiny brass nameplate above her door. To Karen, maintaining order in the neighborhood was her personal mission, and she approached it with an almost religious zeal. It wasn't long before Karen turned her critical gaze toward John's home. At first, her complaints were minor. His mailbox needed repainting, his driveway had a few cracks, and his porch light was slightly dimmer than the approved wattage. John listened patiently and made the necessary adjustments without argument. But there was one thing he refused to change: a small wooden plaque hanging near his front door. The plaque featured a faded American flag draped across it, along with the words *Semper Fi* engraved in bold letters. To John, the plaque was more than just a decoration. It was a reminder of his time in the Marine Corps, a symbol of the sacrifices he and his brothers in arms had made. He didn't display it to show off or seek admiration. It simply meant something to him. Unfortunately, Karen didn't see it that way. To her, the plaque was tacky and out of compliance with the HOA's aesthetic standards. She stopped by John's house multiple times, clipboard in hand, demanding that he remove it. Each time, John politely declined, explaining the significance behind the plaque. But Karen wasn't interested in hearing about sentimentality or personal meaning. In her world, rules were absolute, and exceptions were unacceptable. Still, John remained calm and respectful, hoping the issue would eventually blow over. Little did he know, Karen's persistence was about to take a turn for the worse and spark a chain of events that would leave the entire neighborhood talking. It was a bright Saturday morning, and John was outside painting his fence. The sun warmed his skin as he worked methodically, dipping his brush into the can of white paint with steady hands. He enjoyed these quiet moments. No distractions, no demands, just him and the rhythmic motion of the brush against wood. It was during one of these pauses that Karen Hargrove appeared, clipboard clutched tightly in her hand like a shield. Karen marched up to John's yard with a kind of purposeful stride that made heads turn. She wore her usual uniform, pressed khaki pants, a pastel blouse, and loafers polished to a mirror-like shine. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her reading glasses perched precariously on the edge of her nose. To anyone watching, she looked every bit the part of an HOA enforcer ready to do battle. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Karen said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." John lowered his paintbrush and wiped his hands on a rag before turning to face her. "Morning, Karen. Just fixing up the fence. What's going on?" Karen adjusted her glasses and flipped through the pages on her clipboard, though it was clear she already knew exactly what she wanted to say. "Well, Mr. Miller, I've received several complaints about your property. Not from me, of course, but from other concerned neighbors." She paused dramatically, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Specifically, there's been some concern about that." She pointed toward the wooden plaque hanging near his front door. John sighed inwardly, but kept his expression neutral. "You mean the plaque? I've explained before, it's meaningful to me. It's not hurting anyone." Karen's lips tightened into a thin line. "Meaningful or not, it doesn't comply with our guidelines. We have standards here at Maple Ridge Estates, Mr. Miller. Standards that ensure property values remain high and the neighborhood stays aesthetically pleasing." John crossed his arms over his chest, trying to stay patient. "Karen, I understand the rules, but this isn't just some random decoration. It represents my time in the Marines. It's important to me." For a moment, Karen seemed taken aback, as if she hadn't expected him to bring up his military service again. But then her features hardened, and she let out a dismissive laugh. "Oh, please, you don't look like any soldier I've ever seen. Honestly, Mr. Miller, you're just trying to play the hero card. A wannabe soldier showing off for attention. That's all this is." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, too stunned to respond immediately. The accusation stung, not because it came from Karen, whose opinion he didn't particularly value, but because it undermined everything he had sacrificed during his years of service. The late nights, the missed holidays, the friends he'd lost along the way, all reduced to nothing more than a cheap attempt to impress people. When he finally found his voice, it was calm but firm. "With all due respect, Karen, you don't know anything about me or my service. This plaque isn't about showing off. It's about remembering." But Karen wasn't listening anymore. She gave him a smug smile, clearly pleased with herself for having the last word. "Well, regardless of your intentions, it has to go. Rules are rules, Mr. Miller. If you don't remove it by next week, we'll have no choice but to take further action." With that, she spun on her heel and walked away, leaving John standing alone with his thoughts and a deep sense of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. As Karen disappeared down the street, John shook his head and picked up his paintbrush again. He didn't want to let her get under his skin, but her words lingered like an unwelcome shadow. For the first time since moving to Maple Ridge Estates, he felt truly out of place, not because of where he lived, but because of how little others seemed to understand. Later that evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the neighborhood grew quiet, John sat alone in his living room. The soft glow of a table lamp illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the walls. He leaned back on his couch, staring at the ceiling as Karen's words replayed in his mind like a broken record. A wannabe soldier showing off for attention. The phrase gnawed at him, not because it came from Karen, someone whose opinion he didn't hold in high regard, but because it felt like an insult to everything he'd worked so hard for. John wasn't one to dwell on negativity. Over the years, he'd learned to let things roll off his back, especially when they came from people who didn't understand his world. But this time was different. This wasn't just about him. It felt bigger than that. It felt like a slap in the face to every veteran who had ever served, sacrificed, or given their all without asking for recognition. And yet, here he was, being told that his pride meant nothing more than a desperate grab for attention. Frustrated, John picked up his phone and opened a group chat with some of his closest friends from the Marines. They were scattered across the country now, each carving out their own lives after leaving the Corps, but they still stayed connected through regular messages and occasional meetups. John rarely brought personal issues into their conversations. He valued their bond too much to burden them with his problems. But tonight, he needed to vent. "Hey guys," he typed, hesitating before hitting send. "Something happened today, and I need to get it off my chest." Within minutes, replies started pouring in. His friends knew him well enough to sense when something was bothering him, and they wasted no time checking in. "What's going on, brother?" asked Mike, a former sergeant who now ran a construction business in Texas. "Yeah, spill it," chimed in Carlos, who worked as a teacher in California. "You know we're always here for you." John took a deep breath and recounted the entire encounter with Karen, the plaque, the accusations, the dismissive tone. He even included her parting shot about him being a Wannabe soldier. As he hit send, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because sharing the story lightened the weight on his shoulders, and apprehension because he wasn't sure how his friends would react. The response was immediate and explosive. "Are you kidding me right now?" wrote Ramirez, their former captain, his message punctuated with angry emojis. "Who does this woman think she is? She literally called you a wannabe," added Jake, another buddy from the unit. "Bro, you've got more medals than half the Pentagon." The thread quickly filled with outrage, disbelief, and offers to fly out and confront Karen themselves. For a moment, John almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. These were men who had faced real danger together, who had stood side by side in combat zones, and now they were ready to rally over an HOA dispute. But then Mike sent a message that caught everyone's attention. "You know what? We should show up, not to fight or cause trouble, but to remind her exactly who she's talking about." At first, John thought it was a joke, but as the idea gained traction, it became clear that his friends weren't messing around. They started brainstorming logistics, renting a bus, coordinating schedules, making sure everyone could take time off work. By the end of the night, what had begun as a lighthearted suggestion had turned into a full-blown plan. "Think about it, John," Ramirez wrote. "This isn't just for you. It's for every vet who's ever been disrespected or dismissed. Let's give Karen, and anyone else watching, a lesson they won't forget." John hesitated. The gesture was touching, even overwhelming, but he worried it might be too much. Would it come across as aggressive? Would it embarrass Karen unnecessarily? But deep down, he couldn't deny that the idea stirred something inside him, a mix of pride and gratitude for the brotherhood he'd always cherished. Finally, he replied, "If you guys are serious about this, I won't stop you. Just, let's make sure it's done respectfully." "Respectfully?" Mike shot back. "Absolutely. But make no mistake, we're rolling in full gear. Nobody messes with our family." As John set his phone down, a small smile crept onto his face. For the first time since Karen's visit, he felt a spark of hope, and maybe even a little excitement. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Karen Hargrove was about to learn exactly who she was dealing with. The following week passed in a blur for John. His Marine buddies were true to their word, coordinating every detail with military precision. They rented a bus, arranged uniforms, and even planned a route that would ensure they arrived at Maple Ridge Estates early on Saturday morning, the same day Karen typically conducted her HOA patrols. To keep the element of surprise intact, John played it cool around his neighbors. He watered his plants, fixed a loose shutter on his porch, and avoided giving any hint that something extraordinary was about to happen. On Friday evening, John received a text from Captain Ramirez. Asterisk, "We're rolling out at 600 tomorrow. Be ready, brother." Asterisk. The message sent a jolt of nervous energy through him. He hadn't seen most of his unit in years, and the thought of them showing up en masse was both thrilling and surreal. As he lay in bed that night, he found himself smiling into the darkness, imagining Karen's face when she realized what was happening. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for neighborhood drama. By 8 a.m., John was standing outside, pretending to tidy up his yard while keeping one eye on the road. At exactly 8:15, the rumble of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. A sleek charter bus rounded the corner, its windows tinted but unmistakably full of passengers. It pulled to a stop in front of John's house, and the doors swung open with a pneumatic hiss. Out stepped 25 Marines, dressed in immaculate dress blues, crisp white hats, gleaming brass buttons, and polished shoes that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. Each man carried himself with the same disciplined posture John remembered from their days in service. Neighbors who had been lounging on porches or walking their dogs froze mid-step, staring in awe as the soldiers formed two perfect lines, leading up to John's driveway. John felt a lump rise in his throat as his friends marched toward him. Their expressions were serious, but their eyes sparkled with mischief and camaraderie. As they reached him, one by one, they snapped sharp salutes, a gesture reserved only for those they truly respected. John returned the salute instinctively, his chest swelling with pride despite himself. Captain Ramirez stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. "At ease, gentlemen," he said, then turned to John. "Brother, we heard there was some confusion about whether you're a real Marine. Thought we'd come set the record straight." John chuckled, shaking his head. "You guys didn't have to do this." "Yeah, we did," Ramirez replied firmly. "Because nobody, not some HOA busybody or anyone else, gets to question your honor. You earned this, John. Every bit of it." By now, the entire street had transformed into an impromptu audience. Neighbors leaned over fences, peered out of windows, and gathered on sidewalks, whispering excitedly among themselves. Kids pointed at the Marines with wide-eyed wonder, while adults snapped photos and videos on their phones. Even the usually noisy hum of lawnmowers and hedge trimmers had fallen silent, replaced by the quiet reverence of the moment. Karen Hargrove chose that exact moment to make her entrance. Clutching her clipboard, she emerged from her house with her usual air of self-importance. But as soon as she saw the scene unfolding in front of her, her confident stride faltered. Her mouth dropped open, and the clipboard slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud on the pavement. For several long seconds, Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting between the rows of Marines and John, who stood tall and composed beside them. Finally, she managed to stammer, "Whoa, what? What is this?" Ramirez turned to her, his tone calm but unyielding. "Ma'am, this is our brother. And if I hear one more word about him being a wanted, we're going to have a problem." "Understood." Karen opened her mouth to respond but found no words. Instead, she nodded weakly, her face pale, and her usual bravado completely shattered. For the first time in years, Karen Hargrove was rendered utterly speechless, and the entire neighborhood watched as the woman who prided herself on control was brought to her knees by the sheer force of respect and solidarity. The air was electric as the Marines stood in formation, their presence commanding an unspoken respect that rippled through the neighborhood. Karen Hargrove, still clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, looked smaller than ever under the weight of their collective gaze. Her face flushed red, then pale, as if she couldn't decide whether to be angry or ashamed. For someone who thrived on control and order, this moment must have felt like chaos incarnate. Captain Ramirez stepped forward again, his voice steady but firm. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Karen directly, "we're not here to cause trouble or make anyone uncomfortable. We just wanted to clear up a misunderstanding. This man, John Miller, is one of us. He served his country with honor, courage, and commitment. That plaque on his porch, it's not tacky or against any rule worth following. It's a symbol of sacrifice, a reminder of the men and women who've given everything so people like you can live in peace." Karen blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to process what was happening. She glanced around at the growing crowd of neighbors watching intently, many of whom were nodding in agreement with Ramirez's words. Some even whispered among themselves, their tones shifting from curiosity to admiration for John. The tables had turned entirely, and Karen was no longer the center of attention. She was now the outsider. Feeling the pressure mounting, Karen finally found her voice. I didn't mean. I didn't realize," she stammered, fumbling over her words. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty and embarrassment. "I thought it was just decoration." Ramirez raised a hand gently, cutting her off before she could dig herself deeper. "It's okay, Mom," he said, softening his tone slightly. "We all make mistakes, but let this be a lesson, not just for you, but for everyone here. When someone tells you they've served, when they show pride in their uniform, don't dismiss it. Ask questions. Learn about their story. Because behind every veteran is a journey most civilians will never fully understand." As Ramirez spoke, other Marines began mingling with the crowd of neighbors. They shared stories of their time in service, answered questions from curious residents, and even posed for photos with wide-eyed children. One Marine, Jake, set up a small display on John's front lawn, a folded American flag, a pair of worn combat boots, and a framed photo of John's unit during deployment. Neighbors gathered around, listening intently as Jake explained the significance of each item. Meanwhile, Karen lingered awkwardly near the edge of the gathering, unsure of what to do next. After several minutes of hovering, she approached John hesitantly, her clipboard abandoned on the ground where it had fallen earlier. Her eyes were glassy, and her hands trembled slightly as she extended one toward him. "John," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I shouldn't have said those things." She swallowed hard, clearly fighting back tears. "Can you forgive me?" John studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I accept your apology, Karen," he said evenly. "But this isn't just about me. It's about understanding and respecting the sacrifices veterans have made and continue to make for our freedom. You don't have to agree with everything we do, but please, don't dismiss it either." Karen nodded vigorously, her cheeks flushed with emotion. "You're right. I promise, I'll do better. I'll make sure others know how important this is too." By mid-morning, the atmosphere in Maple Ridge Estates had transformed completely. What started as a tense confrontation had evolved into a celebration of unity and gratitude. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves now chatted openly, sharing laughter and stories inspired by the Marines' visit. Even Karen seemed to find a new purpose, vowing to use her role in the HOA to support veterans rather than criticize them. For John, the day was overwhelming in the best possible way. Watching his brothers in arms stand beside him, seeing his neighbors rally around him, it reminded him why he joined the Marines in the first place, to protect communities like this one. And while he knew life wouldn't always be this picture perfect, he couldn't help but feel hopeful about the future, for himself, for his neighbors, and especially for Karen, who might finally learn that rules aren't everything. Sometimes, heart matters more. In the days that followed the Marines' visit, Maple Ridge Estates buzzed with a newfound energy. Neighbors who had once barely acknowledged each other were suddenly exchanging warm smiles and friendly waves. Conversations at mailboxes stretched longer than usual, often veering into discussions about John's story and the powerful message his friends had delivered. The plaque on John's porch, once deemed out of compliance, became a symbol of pride for the entire neighborhood, a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who serve. Karen Hargrove, in particular, underwent a remarkable transformation. Gone was the clipboard-wielding enforcer obsessed with HOA rules. In her place stood a woman determined to make amends, not just with John, but with the entire community. She threw herself into organizing what she called Honor Our Heroes Day, an event meant to celebrate veterans and educate residents about their service. Flyers went up around the neighborhood, inviting everyone to participate in a day of gratitude and reflection. On the appointed Saturday, Maple Ridge Estates looked different. American flags lined the streets, fluttering gently in the breeze. Tables were set up along the cul-de-sac, adorned with photographs, medals, and memorabilia donated by local veterans, including John. Children ran around with red, white, and blue balloons, while adults mingled over coffee and homemade desserts. At the center of it all stood Karen, clipboard still in hand, but now filled with notes of appreciation instead of complaints. John arrived late, hesitant to take center stage, despite the overwhelming support from his neighbors. When he finally appeared, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, the crowd erupted into applause. Even the kids stopped chasing each other long enough to cheer for him. Embarrassed but touched, John waved awkwardly before retreating to a quiet corner where Ramirez and a few other Marines waited. "You're the star of the show today, brother," Ramirez teased, clapping him on the shoulder. "Better get used to it." "Not my style," John replied with a chuckle. "But I'm glad people are learning something. That's what matters." Throughout the afternoon, veterans shared their stories with rapt audiences. Some recounted harrowing experiences overseas, while others spoke about the challenges of adjusting to civilian life. Each tale was met with silence, broken only by occasional gasps or murmurs of disbelief. For many neighbors, it was their first real glimpse into the lives of those who served, and it left a lasting impression. Karen took the microphone toward the end of the event, her voice trembling as she addressed the crowd. "I want to start by saying how sorry I am for my words, my actions, and my ignorance," she began, glancing briefly at John. "This community has taught me that there's more to life than rules and appearances. It's about connection, respect, and understanding. Today, we honor not just John, but every veteran who has given so much for us. Thank you all for reminding me and teaching me what truly matters." Her speech earned a standing ovation, though Karen looked visibly relieved when it was over. Later, she approached John again, this time without hesitation. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," she said sincerely. "I won't forget what I've learned here." John smiled, genuinely moved by her change of heart. "You don't have to thank me, Karen. You did the work yourself. Just keep going. You're making a difference." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the neighborhood, John couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The plaque on his porch remained untouched, its significance now understood by all. And though he still preferred a quiet life away from the spotlight, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, standing up for yourself can spark a ripple effect that changes everything for the better. The ripple effect of that unforgettable Saturday in Maple Ridge Estates didn't stop with Honor Our Heroes Day. What began as a single event evolved into something far greater, a lasting tradition that brought the community closer together year after year. Karen, true to her word, became one of the most dedicated organizers of the annual celebration. She worked tirelessly to ensure it grew bigger and better, inviting veterans from neighboring towns, arranging guest speakers, and even securing sponsorships from local businesses. Her clipboard was still ever present, but now it served a purpose everyone could rally behind. For John, life returned to its quiet rhythm, though he found himself more involved in the neighborhood than before. Neighbors who had once only nodded politely now stopped by regularly to chat or offer help with yard work. Kids often knocked on his door, asking if they could hear another story about his time in the Marines. At first, John hesitated. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but soon he realized how much these interactions meant to them. He shared tales of camaraderie, resilience, and sacrifice, always emphasizing the importance of kindness and respect. Karen, too, underwent a personal evolution. The woman who once policed flowerbed symmetry now spent her weekends volunteering at veteran outreach programs and organizing care package drives for active duty service members. She even convinced the HOA board to revise some of their stricter rules, introducing exceptions for items of personal significance, like John's plaque. It was a small change, but it reflected a broader shift in mindset, one that prioritized understanding over judgment. Each year, Honor Our Heroes Day became more meaningful. Veterans traveled from miles away to attend, bringing stories that inspired new generations. Local schools started incorporating lessons about military service into their curriculums, using the event as a field trip opportunity. Parents marveled at how their children came home brimming with questions about history and patriotism. Even the older residents, who had lived through wars themselves, felt seen and heard in ways they hadn't in decades. One particularly memorable moment came during the third annual celebration, when a young boy approached John holding a hand-drawn picture. In crayon colors, it depicted a soldier standing proudly beneath an American flag. "Is this what you look like?" the boy asked shyly. John knelt down to meet his gaze. "Not exactly," he said with a grin, "but close enough." He signed the drawing with a heartfelt note. Asterisk to a future hero. Stay curious and kind asterisk. As years passed, Maple Ridge Estates transformed from a cookie-cutter suburb into a tight-knit community bound by shared values. The annual event drew media attention, turning it into a beacon of unity and gratitude. Yet despite the growing recognition, the heart of the celebration remained unchanged, honoring those who served while fostering mutual respect among neighbors. John never sought fame or accolades, but he couldn't deny the profound impact that day had on him and on others. Whenever someone referred to him as the hero next door, he chuckled softly, deflecting the praise. To him, the real heroes were the men and women who stood beside him, both in uniform and out. Still, he appreciated the sentiment, knowing it stemmed from genuine admiration rather than misunderstanding. Looking back, John often thought about how differently things might have turned out if Karen hadn't confronted him that sunny morning. Would he have stayed a quiet stranger in a neighborhood obsessed with appearances, or would he have found another way to connect with his neighbors? He liked to think the outcome would have been similar because deep down, people wanted to understand each other. They just needed a nudge sometimes. And so, life in Maple Ridge Estates continued, shaped by the lessons learned that extraordinary day. For John, it wasn't about proving himself to anyone. It was about bridging gaps, building connections, and reminding everyone that behind every person is a story worth hearing. As long as those stories were told and listened to, the spirit of Semper Fi would live on, not just in his home, but in the hearts of an entire community.